JAG Physical Therapy, providing rehabilitative recovery from sports and soft tissue injuries to knee, foot, ankle, hip, shoulder, elbow, and back injuries. Schedule your appointment with JAG Physical Therapy today and meet their experienced team of physical therapists, occupational therapists, athletic trainers, and exercise physiologists invested in your full recovery. Get back the life you love at JAG Physical Therapy, the most awarded physical therapy provider in New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. For more information or to make an appointment, just visit jagpt.com. That's jagpt.com. Lacrosse families, meet Orgo, the calendar app that actually thinks like a sports parent. Orgo syncs with team apps you already use and enriches schedules with real-world logistics. Every event shows travel times, early arrival buffers, carpool assignments, conflict alerts, and time-specific weather so you know what gear to pack. Get your athletes on it too. Orgo teaches time literacy, an executive skill for life. One subscription, whole family. Code LAX25 is 25% off. Just $44 locks in sanity for the whole year. Visit www.orgohq.com. That's www.orgohq.com. Sports build champions and leaders, but every champion has moments of struggle, pressure, anxiety, burnout, and those moments deserve real support. PAX Health is proud to sponsor the New Jersey Lacrosse podcast because they believe mental health care should be available when you need it, as you need it. Therapy and psychiatric services for kids, teens, communities, and families. Telehealth and in-person appointments are available within 48 hours. PAX Health, people helping people. Visit pax.health. That's PAX.health. This is the New Jersey Lacrosse Podcast. I'm your host, Keith Glock.
I'm Bill Tharp.
I'm Anthony Terranova.
And this here is Gil Swenson. Welcome to the New Jersey Lacrosse Podcast. Hello, everybody. Welcome into the what we think will be the final episode of the 2026 season. Keith Glock and Bill Tharp here with you as Gil and Nova are otherwise occupied with summer club stuff / parenting. Tharp, you're the only deadbeat dad of the group that's able to join on a midday Sunday. So thanks for taking the time away from your kids.
Yeah, no, when you say it like that, you make me sound like the world's best dad. So thank you.
Hey, anytime. That's why I'm here. Tharpy, I thought we had a good discussion of the end of the season games. So it's never too early, obviously, to discuss 2027, and that's kind of where we want to end. We'll give you guys all a little bit of a taste of kind of who is going from the 2026 class, what's the most impactful losses. We'll take you through who we think might be intriguing teams to watch in 2027, and then a little, Tharp, I want to revisit a discussion that we had in this episode last season, and I think it kind of still is relevant, but we'll take everybody there when we get there. So I throw this out to you, Bill, as you look at the graduating classes of 2026, some obviously very talented players are leaving the schools at which they played. So in your mind's eye, who are the teams most impacted by graduation and who were the most impactful graduates?
Yeah, I mean it's kind of crazy. I feel like right at the top, it seems like everybody's graduating a ton of talent, and I think it really starts like we said at the top. Don Bosco and Seton Hall specifically are being really impacted by graduation. Don Bosco is losing almost their entire starting lineup, and then Seton Hall is losing I think five of their tops, their top eight or so scorers. Now on the other hand, they do return. Seton Hall specifically, returns Jaggers and Mexon and Drew Rothman, who just committed to Syracuse. So they'll have a couple high level commits on the defensive end back, but they also lose Sean Hayes. So I think Seton Hall and Don Bosco specifically are super impacted. On the non-public side. And then looking over at the public school side, Summit just gets crushed with graduation. They lose five of their top six scorers. They lose two or three top level defensemen in John Conniff, Jake Reimold, and then probably most importantly, they lose the NJ.com Player of the Year and Robbie Kiva in goal. So big losses for Summit, compiled with, as we talked about last week, the retirement of Coach Davidson. And then another one that I had pinpointed was Bridgewater. Bridgewater has a really solid senior class they're graduating, including Declan Cardilla, Jack Fuentes, Mikey Bradis, and Reed Feinstein, all of which are going Division One. So I think that's a group in particular that is kind of really, really impacted by graduation. On the other, groups that I think are going to be kind of neutral. They definitely have their losses, but they bring back a pretty decent amount. I had down here Chatham and Rumson. Chatham loses Kyle Gibney. They lose Lachlan Mahoney defensively, but they do bring back obviously some superstars in Nick Lagunowich. They bring back Quinn Grosso. The other big loss for them is obviously Shep Boyd, who's going to be, stud for them right away. But they bring back their goalie. They bring back a handful of other good polls. And, Chatham's done a really good job of developing talent over here the past few years. And I think Rumson's kind of in the same boat. They graduate Luke Lydon. They graduate Joseph Whitehouse. But they've returned some really strong pieces, especially defensively. I think their starter at the faceoff this year was only a sophomore, so he'll return. But yeah, this is a really, really impactful senior class. It's kind of like if you go up and down the top 20, even on the teams on the back end, you look at a team like West Morris, who had probably their best year in program history. They lose arguably, maybe the best player in their program history in Luke Gauss. You look at a school like Pingree, they graduate Luke Burns and a handful of other, strong defensive pieces. Shawnee loses Thomas McEnany, Rockowitz, Lumberg. So a lot of these teams, Keith, are losing some real superstars. So I think it really kind of shakes up, what the top 20 looks like, heading into next year. And I don't feel prepared enough to kind of say, oh, here's my top five in order for next year. But I guess a little teaser for March of 2027. I think we're going to be, there might be some new teams heading into next year.
Yeah, I don't really remember there being a time how I feel right now where there is just, I will call it uncertainty, and I think that probably, I feel like that maybe a little bit more because of the retirements of, Coach Davidson and the Appels and, any other names that, may end up announcing that they're not coming back to coach. It's going to be different than what it was. The talent in the state is still going to remain the same, and teams are going to be good, and players are going to be good. But just seeing kind of how things shake out. And there's another thing that we didn't even talk about this in the lead up, but as we talk about uncertainty, it's something that kind of comes to the forefront of my mind. We are going into another reorganizational year in terms of the groups. Every 2 years, depending on school population, things get shuffled and we don't know who's exactly going to be where. So, for example, Summit was always a Group 2 team for the longest time. And then in the last cycle, they got bumped up to Group 3. Where do teams that we previously knew to be in one group, how does their school size impact where they're playing for, in the playoffs? And we won't know that for a good while yet at this point. So that's not just a tease at something that we already know. I would tell you if we did know, but that's just a reality that we're going to have to deal with as well.
Yeah, and it's hard because it's like it doesn't track over every sport either. It's not like classifications will come out in one sport and you're going to be certain. It's a little different for every sport, which is kind of confusing, but it'll definitely be interesting to see. Like, you're right. Like, and as talent demographics are changing, right? Like, some schools get bigger, some schools are consolidating. As we're talking about, with when we're talking about the shot clock stuff, like, all this uncertainty with where we're at just politically and budgetorily. I don't know if that's a real word, but I'll make it a word. There's just so much uncertainty, but I think you're right. It's going to be really fascinating. We talked about with Sparta this year, right? Sparta finally gets over the hump because there's no Summit in their group. So, that definitely changes the landscape, especially, when you look at Group One specifically, some of those smaller schools, we pointed out how Group One South was really, really strong. But if you look on a map, right, you don't typically consider Madison or Glen Ridge to be particularly southern. So, it'll be interesting to see if, do any of them move to Group One North, things like that. So it's not even like moving up or down a group per se, but even, moving geographically, moving from south to north is equally as interesting.
Yeah, you never know, and a lot of that is based on what schools are playing lacrosse, right? That's why it's not standard across everything, because the way that the state does it is they look at total school size, and then that puts you within, the 1, 2, 3, or 4, and then you look at the total number of schools that play within each of those group sizes, and then the state kind of splits it right down the middle. So whatever that, as the schools transition between group sizes, then we see, all right, who's actually playing lacrosse as opposed to basketball, say, right? Because there's a lot more teams that play basketball than play boys lacrosse. And that's how all of this stuff gets decided. So if anybody was out there wondering why it's different across sports, that's why, obviously. So it'll be interesting. And that's one of the things that makes sports great, and that sounds really cliche and simple, but again, it's why we all love the competitive nature of the thing that we do.
I'm going to totally spring this on you because I'm just curious your thoughts, and because you kind of work as an administrator at a school as well. Um, we were texting in the group chat. This was probably a little bit ago, and we just didn't get a chance to talk about it. Down in Florida, they created the like the Super League for football,
Yeah.
and it essentially was like the top 8 teams. And obviously, I enter this conversation with you acknowledging football could not be any more different than lacrosse. But I'm curious, Keith, as you're in a really unique spot where you're super involved on the lacrosse side in your professional career, you're super involved in the schools. Could you see something like that happening in New Jersey in particular, as the gap between, let's call it, the haves and have-nots of the non-publics really specifically, but even some of these public schools, do you think there's a world that within the confines of the NJSIAA there could exist a super group like this, and that super group plays for their own particular championship, or is that kind of not really feasible with where we're at?
No, I mean, just being honest, I would love to sit here and tease it and say, like, yeah, it's the thing people are talking. It's not going to happen. The NJSIA has a considerable interest in being uniform across sports as much as it possibly can be. And the format in which that they do things, if you want to call something a super group of this or that, I mean, call it the way that when I read that, and I also saw some guy post on social media, and I don't know if this was true or not, that Florida Boys Lacrosse was going to do the same thing, but like breaking out the top 8 to play in their own thing when the playoff starts is essentially like playing the Tournament of Champions before the playoffs were to start out. And that's, it's almost like taking an end run around the elimination of the Tournament of Champions to play it at the same time that the playoffs are happening without having to be crowned a champion in order to play. I guess they're saying this is how we're going to value the regular season down there in Florida. And I also think that Florida's probably in a little bit of a different spot from a boys lacrosse perspective as well, because I think there are some really, really good teams at the top. And I think that as much as we even saw a gap in the playoffs in terms of the disparity of the scores and everything like that, that I think the gap in Florida is probably tenfold what it is in New Jersey between the top schools and the bottom schools. So no, I don't see that happening. And I was disappointed until this year with the attendance and the excitement for the Cursed Cup, and I don't really know what changed this year in terms of attendance and stuff like that, but the final was really well attended. I thought it had some juice. It had juice that it never had before. I hope that momentum kind of keeps up. We'll see, I guess. So, all right, as we look forward again, Tharp, we know, you mentioned the teams that were really impacted by graduation? Any of the powerhouses that you look at for next season that you're like, yeah, they're a powerhouse and they're not going anywhere. They're going to be a powerhouse again.
Yeah, I think the big one that comes to mind for me was Del Barton, and I don't know if I'm just swayed by the fact that Brandon Foder's coming back, and I think on paper, he's probably the most talented kid in the state, and obviously his twin brother John Fodor. But I think that Del Barton, they bring back Kane Quinault as well. They bring back Jesse Denegri as their other face-off guy. So, they bring back McGinty and net. They're definitely gonna have some guys to replace. They lose Coach Kovalchuk's son. He was a starter for them defensively. Derek Core. They lose him defensively, but they have pieces, and I think that you could persuade me to put them in the kind of the neutral bucket where they're going to be pretty impacted, but I think at the end of the day they still have their superstars. So I would say I think Del Barton's probably going to be the least impacted. I would say that they're you know probably the preseason number one heading into next year. Um, I I know we use the term blue bloods or top teams. I think Scotch Plains, even though they're not a traditional blue blood or one of the premier teams, I think they are a team um, that's going to be high in the preseason rankings again next year. Obviously, they lose Caleb McDowell defensively. They lose Klopfer offensively, but they bring back Nick Homer. They bring back Noah Brown defensively. They bring back both Scarpa brothers, one offensively, one defensively. Kachanowicz, they bring back offensively. They bring back Nate Filler at the faceoff X. So I think Scotch Plains is a team that is going to be remain at the top. For the past few years, they've kind of flirted. They won a state championship a few years ago, and then this year they had as great of a season as they've had in a long time. I think they will remain at the top of the top 20. And then for me, I put CBA in this bucket. I think CBA was a team last year that was super young. Half of the season they didn't have arguably their best player in John Little. Figure he'll be there the entire season. Danny Verone has kind of broken out this summer as a bona fide superstar. In some rankings, he's a top five player in the class of 2028. They have other guys, Jackson Cheney, um, some really nice Lembo offensively. There's just a lot of pieces. They lose Caden Lucic offensively. They graduate their goalie Shane Borenson, but otherwise, there's a lot of pieces to really really like about CBA. So I think they're a team that they were a little up and down this year. They were up mostly. I think that CBA will be a team that is pretty loaded come preseason.
Okay. And how about some teams that we weren't talking about all year this year that you look at and you go, okay, here's some under the radar teams to watch?
Yeah, I think the number one for me is St. Joe's Metuchen. I know they got some love towards the end of the season. They return a ton, especially offensively, and then they also return their goalie Nicky Zanetto, who had a really really strong year. They return their face-up guys Sebastian Asuncio, who was really really strong. I don't mean to be speaking absolutes. I don't think they're going to be touched in the GMC. I think this year the championship game was about a 10 goal difference. I think that gap's only going to widen when you just consider what some of the teams in the GMC lost. I think they're going to be absolutely loaded. With the caveat of they're in non-public, so it's always hard to really kind of break into that top four. But this year, I think Notre Dame was a team we had pegged as a strong team. I think St. Joe's could be that team. They're gonna blow out all their regional competition. They're gonna blow out all the teams in their conference, and then they test themselves out of schedule. So I think St. Joe's Metuchen, Coach Calandria really making his mark on the team. Um, this team probably could have gone in the last group because they are definitely more of a blue blood. I think Westfield on paper is going to be a very 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 strong team next year. They do not lose much at all. They lose Cooper Chimay, who is a role player for them in the midfield. They lose a couple of pieces, D midi wise and stuff, but uh, their biggest loss will be Ben Seward, their LSM kind of do it all guy. but offensively, Westwood brings back a ton. They have some good young face-off guys who should be able to step in. They return their goalie Tyson Varner, who you assume is going to get better after a summer of development. But I think on paper, again, I didn't sit down and go through it. I would not be stunned if Westfield was a top three team in the state next year come preseason. I think they're super talented. Got to give a shout out to my boy Gil and the Randolph Rams. I think Randolph had a good year this year. There was a lot of talk 2 years ago of them missing the playoffs due to the PowerPoints, and they had a good year this year. I think they will graduate some pieces, but they bring back a ton again offensively. So I think Randolph's a team that's going to be right there again, probably a preseason top 20 team. It's just unfortunate for them; they're stuck in Group 3 North, with Chatham and Summit and Scotch Plains. So not going to be any easier, but I do think Randolph will have a strong team. And then the last team, which might dovetail well into our conversation. Our next conversation is Southern Regional. I know we talked about them last episode. They only graduate three seniors. So I think Southern is a team, again, probably going to be preseason ranked. But I think they just return a lot of different pieces. One of the things you could say about Southern, they're super invested in club lacrosse. Almost everyone on their team is playing for some sort of club team. Their coach coaches the team, so they're getting essentially year-round training. And like you kind of said, Glock, they were super competitive in the Group 4 championship game. But I think Southern's another team that I think will be pretty strong heading into 2027.
You mentioned St. Joe's Metuchen, and you touched on the fact that Coach Calandra making a mark. I want to do more than just a small brushstroke over that, because I think the retirements in the coaching areas that we've seen, like, coaching matters, right? I mean, obviously, if you like, there's a reason why these teams that were powerhouses forever are powerhouses forever. Obviously, you need the kids, but in order to get the most out of the kids, you have to be able to push the right buttons and do the right things. And that's more than X's and O's, as you well know. It's relationships, it's building of a culture, of a feeder system, of a lot of different things. And I think Coach Calandra at St. Joe's Metuchen has kind of gone under the radar there, because his move from Chatham to St. Joe's was down when he took the program over. So there's and I'm going to use a crude analogy here when I say it, there's a little bit of Syracuse in them, in that when he took over, it was like, all right, let's give him 3 years to get the guys in there and get the system in. And you could kind of see them coming a little bit. St. Joe's Metuchen's a team that I could kind of see coming a little bit here, because what Coach Calandra has wanted to do, he's obviously as veteran and as accomplished a coach as you have in the state of New Jersey at this point. And the stuff that he wants to run, especially defensively, you can't just pick up overnight, right? These are the kind of things that are built through continuity, and they're built through years and years of kind of doing the same things over and over. So I think I completely agree with you there, Tharpy, when you say St. Joe's Metuchen's on the come, because this feels like the year where it's like, oh, we probably really should have been talking about this until now, before now, but wouldn't shock me to see them play some really competitive games with some really, really good teams next year.
Yeah, I mean, and they definitely lose some pieces defensively, but when you're going to face off at 80% and you got a goalie that saves at 75%, like, you're going to be able to find defensemen, like you said, to fill a role. But and the other piece of it is we thought Notre Dame had a pretty big advantage in the CVC this year, and the county final was competitive with Robbinsville, right? It wasn't a blowout, but I mean, St. Joe's is going to clear every team in the GMC by 12 to 15. And this is no disrespect to those other teams, but South Brunswick graduates a ton, Old Bridge is, solid, but there's just such a gap there. It's like, It's almost like, Seton Hall and Essex County level of like disparity, like it's but at the end of the day, it's going to be it's always hard for them, man. But I guess like if you're Coach Calandra, why not pour everything you can into winning the county championship? Like it means it gives kids a reason to come to school there. You know,
Oh, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. I mean, kids are from places, right? They didn't grow up in St. Joe's Metuchen. They grew up in a town, and they have,
right?
play. So there's reasons to play it. There's no doubt about that. Um, and I want to touch on Del Barton because you just talked about St. Joe's being able to face off and stop the ball. I've said it for years. Working at Montgomery as long as I have, when Montgomery was coming up, in my early years there, and Montgomery was a powerhouse for years and years. It's hey, every 2 years, youth coaches make your best athlete the goalie. Okay, when they're real young, right? If you can face off and if you can stop the ball, you can win a ton of lacrosse games. And when you look at, so it's like Del Barton, oh, you bring back two of the best, if not the two best face-off guys in the state already. They're both coming back. Your starting goaltender is coming back, and your best offensive player is coming back from a team that just finished winning the Curse Cup. Yeah, I would say you're probably going to be pretty good. St. Joe's Metuchen, you face off, you can stop the ball. You can win games that where everything else isn't always clicking when you always have the ball and the other team can't score. I know that sounds rudimentary, but it's you just youth coaches, if you're listening to this, like you need goalies and you need face-off guys. And the best athletes all want to be attackmen because they want to score goals. But like when your best athlete is the goalie, boy, I mean, we talked about it. I don't remember if it was on the pod or in our group chat of who would we draft in the all-time player rankings in goal. And I keep saying for my money, it's Rich DeAndrea, the current Petty coach. When as a player at Petty, he was the best athlete on the field in the goal, and it was by a country mile. So, I think it pays. So let's move on to our last topic for the day, Tharpy. Last year, you and I talked about the emergence of South Jersey in terms of Kingsway and Shawnee and all these teams that were, just like, okay, here comes the South. And the question that we asked in this episode last year was, can the South remain, as strong as they were? And I think as we look at the 2026 season, we would say it probably didn't live up to some of the hype that we thought that those teams might, they didn't carry the momentum through this season in a way that we thought that they might. And it's not to say they were bad teams. It's just, it wasn't exactly the kind of pop that we thought. So now my question is, do they have a chance to be resurgent?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's like it's funny because it's like if a couple of these state finals go the other way, you're looking at it a lot differently because it's like going into the game, right? You would have said Rumson was the favorite over Lakes. You know, I probably would have said Ocean City was the favorite over Southern, or excuse me, over Sparta, but I don't know if that was just my thing or that was the group consensus. And then St. Augustine was the number one team in New Jersey for half the season. So if things go a little differently, then all of a sudden three of the five champions are from the South, as opposed to them being shut out this year. So I guess Glock, to answer your question, I mean, for me, I think as even as I said, teams are going to improve. I think Rumson is probably and again with the caveat that we don't know of what groups these teams are going to be in. I think Rumson is a team that will be improved. Obviously, Southern. I think even looking at Kingsway, Kingsway doesn't lose a ton now. This year was interesting. Was it begs the question. Was 2025 Kingsway the outlier and this year more of the norm where they'll win 14 15 games, they'll beat the teams they're supposed to, and then kind of lose to the teams they're supposed to? Or are they more like that 2025 team? And then Shawnee eats three massive losses. So the way I look at it, as everybody, like I said, at the top especially is graduating some major pieces. Now, I do think that the trend of South Jersey lacrosse doesn't go away because they get shut out in the state championships, right? I do think that they are going to continue to ascend, and I think there's a very real chance that we look at the end of the 2027 being like, okay, maybe this is the more of the norm where 1 to 2 state championships do go down south. I think where it's always going to be hard to see a South Jersey champion is that group four, just because the Ridgewoods, the Westfields, the Bridgewaters of the world. But if Southern is as strong as we think they can be, I think there's a really good chance that maybe they finally punch through in the biggest size. So I think that's where I'm at. And then obviously, St. Augustine's going to take some graduation losses, and I know they're way down south, and they're not probably what you traditionally think of when you think of South Jersey lacrosse. But I do think them and CBA will kind of carry the torch for the non-publics down there. But what's going to happen with Manasquan? We didn't really talk about them much this year. Manasquan was way down compared to what they've been in the past. Is Manasquan going to be able to return to form? I think that's a really big question that has to be answered. And like what has caused this shift in Manasquan, for example? Is it more families that are living in Fairhaven? Is it more families that are sending their kids to CBA? Like what's happening down there that you know Manasquan all of a sudden for years, right? Since what 2015, 2016, somewhere in there, Manasquan has been a power. Now all of a sudden they become kind of average. So I'm curious is with Manasquan specifically, like what changed there, and because Coach Naz didn't become a bad coach all of a sudden, right? Like Coach Naz still can coach his ass off. So did the town change, the demographics change, like what happened with Manasquan? I think that'll be interesting to keep our eyes on.
Is it also just 1 year? I mean, who
Right.
knows? It could be anything. And I'm not smart enough or in you know, the pipeline of watching, people play to know, oh, hey, don't worry about it. There's a strong eighth grade class coming or something like that. Those are things that where we would really be getting in the weeds about that I kind of despise that people do. But listen, here's what I know about New Jersey lacrosse in 2027. It's going to be different than what it was this year and for 35 years previous. It's going to be exciting because of the great talent that exists here within the state, and we have to wait to see how it plays out. So, as a farewell to 2026 and a very early welcome to 2027, I will tell you that I am excited about what has happened this year in terms of all the great lacrosse that we saw and the momentum carrying all the way through the Curse Cup. And then certainly excited for new things are always fun, Tharp. They just are. We like new things. So we'll see what
Hey,
happens.
just to put a bow on arguably the biggest conversation. So there will be no vote on shot clock in 2027, correct? Like we have to bottle that up for a year. The next time we can vote is in 2028. Is that
Correct.
is that correct?
That is
Okay.
correct.
So
Yeah, RIP shot clock
what are we going to
conversations.
complain about next year? We can't complain about shot clock. We can't complain about PowerPoints because they're kind of hunting on that a little bit. I wonder what we're going to complain about.
I have just like I know there's going to be good lacrosse in 2027, I know you're going to find something to complain about. So whatever that is, again, we'll have to wait and see, I guess. That's another little fun preview for everybody there in 2027.
Yeah.
Tharp, it's been a fun year hanging out with you guys, and I appreciate you letting me moderately hijack this thing that we do every week, and I really enjoy it.
Yes, yeah, it's been fun. Hell of a season, and looking forward to the Garden State Cup next. I think in 2 weeks, and hopefully we'll get some little content out there for that. Some little something for you people to chew on, and then you know keep looking out on the Instagram. We'll pump out some content, I'm sure, here and there as we get ready for 2027 because March, what is it? March 8th next year? March 8th, right around the corner.
No doubt about it. This has been the 2026 season of the New Jersey Lacrosse Podcast, all 17 episodes of it. Hope you enjoyed it. Tharp, I love you. I'm sure I'll talk to you 4.9 million times in our group chat. And thank you to everybody out there who listened to us all season long. We will be back before you even know it with some new content for next season. Have a great rest of the summer.